So first about career pathway. From experience, I think it's easier for researchers to switch into the profession of evaluation. Yes, I can. So one evidence to back that up. If you look across all the voluntary professional association for evaluations across the world, you will find out that most of the members are actually those in the academics. So those that are doing real research work. So it's easier if you have an idea, if you've done research work before. Now it's super easy for you to switch into evaluation because research designs, especially social research designs, is also embedded within evaluation designs, and I'm going to speak more about that in a bit. So most of the members, most of the people carrying out evaluation are from academics, not so I'm saying PhDs in psychology, PhDs in sociology, PhDs in anthropology, PhDs in mathematics, PhD in the science field, So you will see that most of these people in evaluation, they also come from academics. Also the same thing with some of the thought leaders in evaluation, either those that are African-based or those that are Europeans or Americans. You find that they don't necessarily have a PhD in evaluation, and that is if there's anything, if you will get a whole lot of things on PhD in evaluation. But I mean, you have that recently. You've been having schools, institutions doing that. But most of the thought leaders, you find that they are their PhD in some of these social science courses. I don't want to go into the worldview of research because I think that also influences evaluation. So, and I mean the program, those that are programmatic and the rest, that's also a way to look at research and evaluation, but I'm not going to go into those different 4 typical worldviews in research. So in terms of career pathways, it's important. It's good if you have a research knowledge, if you have done research. And what does that mean? It means if you have carried out a research work for your undergrad, then you should be able to easily switch to evaluation, right? Like a component of evaluation will be similar to what you might have done before if you've done research work. So I needed to mention it that, yes, it's relatable to one component of monitoring and evaluation, knowing fully well that in result-based monitoring and evaluation, you have 12 components. So in career-wise, I think it's easier to switch from research to evaluation. I'm going to mention one thing, but let's go to the designs at this time. So in terms of, on one hand, there are research designs, and I'll encourage us to, if you don't, Creswell is a popular book that if you're in research, if you have done your master's before, this is a typical book that, especially when you're writing your thesis, or maybe in some places dissertation, this is one, I would say, one of the most referenced book for carrying out your research. Research designs by Creswell, right? The 2 Creswell, John and David. I think it's a good book, and it's something you should have because in it talks about all the social science, all the research methods. You also have the worldview as well. It gives you all the method approaches to research that you can think about. But if you think that your research designs are quantitative, which focuses on quantity responses, like doing analysis, giving insights into responses that are in quantity versus responses that are in quality, teams, testimonials, categories. You want to think about the qualitative kind of design. And you can, you can have this as a mixed method in research, right? That you can mix quantitative and you can have a mix of a quantitative method and a qualitative method, which in essence, you can say, for example, I administer a questionnaire as a quantitative research only questionnaire, which has lots of closed-ended questions in it. And I also would do an individual interview with respondents. That's a mixed method kind of research design. Quantitative is the one that I mentioned when you only administer the questionnaire to the respondents. And I'm careful to say that most of the questions you have in it are closed-ended. And that's what we call quantitative, closed-ended, most of them. You just have few that are just open-ended. Then you have the qualitative research where you think about focus group discussion, ethnography, which is observation of entities for a longer period of time. You could think about focus group discussion, individual interviews, group discussions as qualitative research. The last one is the mixed method, which I already said earlier on. If you look at all the examples I've given, they're actually the same thing you do in evaluation. I stand to be corrected. So it is important to note that all those research designs are what we also use as an approach or as a method in evaluation itself. So you have evaluation designs also the same way you have research designs. And I think in writing for evaluation, in responding to requests for proposals, of course, there's virtually no request for proposal that you won't think about evaluation design, which, it will normally state like, are you going to implement, what design are you going to use? In fact, some of them would have given you an idea of the design that they want. So you have experimental design. I'm not going to talk more about this because the earlier video that I showed you, which is on YouTube about evaluation designs, is as detailed instructions, detailed information about these three different types of designs. So experimental designs, whose example is randomized control trials. And so the two basic examples, the randomized control trials and also the pre-test, post-test design. So these are two typical type of experimental designs that we have in evaluation. I think the last brown bag, we talked about sampling, and this is where sampling becomes very, very important. So who do you sample? How do you sample people? What units do you sample, right? So experimental design is said to have high validity in evaluation because it's basically experimental. What do we mean by high validity? It means that there's a huge reduction in bias for the results you will get in experimental designs. And most times, experimental designs are used at low scale. So for pilot projects, for establishing policy decision making, a policy on, for example, on transportation in a small community, they can use experimental design, especially randomized control trials, or pre-test, post-test design. Randomized control trials is the one that you need a control group and a treatment group at the beginning and at the end of the program. So you need these two, and you need to collect your data from these two. Same way with pre-test and post-test. So when you have beneficiaries at the beginning of a program, you ask them a question, and at the end of that program, you ask them the same question you asked them when they were admitted into the program. So these two designs are experimental. Quasi-experimental is just like an adaptation of your randomized control trial, where you don't necessarily need to administer your instrument, whatever instrument you're using. So you don't need to administer your instrument at the beginning of the program to a control group. That's quasi-experimental. Then you have non-experimental. You can have, in this, you can have longitudinal evaluation, longitudinal design, where so if a project is like 6 years, you conduct evaluation every year. That's longitudinal. Also in non-experimental is the ex-post evaluation, where you administer the instruments that you would use. Either it's qualitative when the program already ended. That's ex-post design. And ex-post design is the most used type of design in evaluation. So those are the three types of evaluation design, but the relationship is that each of these evaluation designs uses a research design. So it's either you're going quantitative, or you want to be strictly qualitative, or you're going to use a mixed method. Of course, most times you see a mixed method kind of evaluation being prominent in this field. I wanted to, so in experimental design, and why we always say that, yes, remember, like I said, experimental design has high validity. There's a huge reduction in bias for the results that you get from that evaluation. This kind of experimental design has been tested and used by the JPAL lab at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. They are the ones that have been doing a whole lot of randomized control trials across the world. And they have a website, and I'm going to show us, maybe in the course of, if our time hasn't been fast spent, I'm going to show us their websites. You can find a whole lot of evaluation that has already been done on RCTs across the world. A popular one is the randomized evaluation, randomized control trial on deworming. Deworming is a program on its own, and they've carried out, JPAL has carried out a whole lot of randomized control trials in evaluation on this. So you can check out their, so it's at povertyactionlab.org. Povertyactionlab.org it has a repository of evaluations, rapid, or what we call randomized evaluations across the world. Okay, so randomized control trials is also similar to clinical trials. So clinical trials in the medicals, right? So I mean, most of the vaccines that you have around have gone through clinical trials, and I think clinical trials became much more popular during COVID-19. So to test how potent the COVID vaccine is, clinical trials are being used where you have a treatment group and a control group, but that is on human beings, right? But in evaluation, the randomized evaluation of what we call RCTs are on programs and projects. And I hope we get that. The other thing I wanted to talk about in terms of relationship is that, in research, you say literature reviews, right? You do a whole lot of literature reviews, especially maybe chapter 1 is composed of so many literature reviews, which is you looking at literatures about the topic you're interested in. So theses, dissertations, journals that have been written about your topical interests. That's what you do in research. In evaluation, yes, we do also that as well, like reviewing all programs, projects, documents. It can involve you looking at strategy documents. In fact, it might involve reviewing a research that has been done around that project before. So, for example, I mentioned deworming programs for young children across the world. Their research, main research, not evaluation now, around deworming also, which gives general knowledge, right? So you might want to also review that as an evaluator of such program, So desk research, we call it desk review, some call it desk analysis, is one kind of method, which you can relate with research as well. But this time you'll be referring to all those documents, and if possible, you review a research work, you'll be referring to the research work as well. So I think in summary is to look at the research designs embedded inside evaluation designs, whether it's quantitative, qualitative, mixed method, is the same way any of your evaluation design will use any of those research design, whether it's experimental, whether it's passive experiment, whether it's non-experimental. You would use either of these research designs in the work that you do. Now, in conclusion, we always try and create a difference or speak about difference between research and evaluation. And it has different dynamics to this, in which you can say that research takes a longer period of time. And evaluation might be shorter. However, there are some evaluations. So for example, if you're using a longitudinal evaluation, longitudinal design, for example, a project that is 5 years. So you want to be conducting evaluation like every year. So you need to think about that. So I think in terms of duration, you will see people doing research for 2 years, right? While evaluation, most of the evaluations that are done, you see, I said most, there are some that are longitudinal, but most that you see might be 6 months, 5 months, 3 months before you end it and you write your reports and that's it. Another way to distinguish it is that that report is not necessarily or cannot necessarily be a generalized knowledge that is applicable everywhere in the world. That is for evaluation. But in research, there is that generalizability that comes with research. And that is also related to the sampling methods that we talked about, or sampling design that we talked about last brown bag. So in terms of the duration, you can think about, you might want to delineate research from evaluation. Also in terms of who the respondents are, most times evaluations are done on program projects, policies, while the research is done based on general knowledge around the world. So, so these are two different things that you need to think about. So I think on that note, I will